All right, so in this video, I'm going to show you how to destring a variable. And so what that means is Stata recognizes two broad kind of ways that variables can be encoded. I know normally when we think of data analysis, we think of categorical and continuous variables. And it's still true, but in Stata, there's another kind of difference to keep in mind, and that is string variables and numeric variables. And so string variables means that Stata recognizes the contents of a variable as being text instead of numbers. Even if only numbers are in there, it can still be encoded as the data can still be encoded as a string. And what happens is if you try to run analysis on a string variable, you'll get errors. So for instance, this data that we're looking at here is every school in New Jersey from the 2017-18 school year, and so we'll see the data set is by staff role school, staff role district. So each line is a district, but that district enters twice. So there's once for administrators and once for teachers, and so this shows the retention rate for that particular role. So what is the retention rate for administrators in the district? What is the retention rate for teachers in the district? And so let's say that we want to run some sort of analysis on this. So you'll see here that everything is in red. And if you see something in the data that shows up in red, that means that it is recognized as a string variable. And so what happens is, let's say that you wanted to do a run some descriptive statistics on the retention rate, you'll get nothing. And the reason for that is because it only recognizes that data as a string variable. If you're still unsure, you can go over here to the variables pane, pick something. So this is the variable we're looking at, and if you look here, it says type, and you'll see str. So that means that it is recognized as a string variable. You could also do that by looking at the codebook. And you can tell that this is a string variable because it says type string, and then it gives you a little bit more information that's not terribly helpful because again, this is a string variable. So here is what we want. What we want to do is we want to destring the variable. So we want to tell Stata to go through and recognize this particular variable as a number, as numeric, and not as text, so that we can run some analyses on it. So first thing to keep in mind is that everything has to actually be a number in order to destring a variable. And so what can happen is sometimes there will be a random, like n will be a value for a variable or something like that. And if that happens, then you won't be able to destring it because Stata doesn't know what to do with the n. So what you want to do is make sure that you have everything recoded so that only numbers are present in the variable that you want to destring. Now, in our case, I don't think that we have to do that. So we can just jump right to dstring. So that's the command. So we just type in dstring, then the name of the variable that we want. And then there are different options. So you can destring a variable and have it create a new variable if you want. There are some other options where if you don't want to mess around with recoding everything to be a number, if there's a random n or something like that, you can tell it to just ignore those and only copy over numeric values. My preference is to go through and actually make sure that you change everything. It's important, and by that I mean figure out what is not encoded as a number, why that might be the case, and then make all of those changes. It's just about, to me, I think that that's important to just kind of be familiar with your data in that way. So let's say we've gone through, we're ready to destring our variable. We just type in the dstring command, then the variable that we want to destring, and then we have to specify an option, because if we just type this, we'll get an error. So what we have to do is decide whether we want to generate, which means create a new variable that is a numeric version of the string variable, or we can just type replace. So if we do that, we'll see that we get an error here. So it says contains non-numeric characters, no replace. So then what we can do is, so let's tabulate that and look for what are the values that are causing us problems? Okay, so in this case, there's an N. So there are 21 cases where a school is coded as an N, which means that they're just not reporting the retention rate. So what we can do is we can just replace that to be missing. So what we can do is we'll just type replace. Oh, and I guess if we wanted to see what was going on in these particular schools, we could just can say browse if. And so this is going to be show us the data, show us the observations. So that's browse if the value of this particular variable is n. So it's a string, so it's in quotes. And so then that's going to show us all of the places where, where we get an n for the retention rate. And it looks like a lot of charter schools. So I'm sure that there's some feature of the way the data is collected from charter schools that causes the retention rate to not be reported. So what we can do is we want to replace the values of this variable to be empty, to be nothing, if the value of that variable is n. So we know that there are 21 instances in our data where it isn't, where n is what we get. So, oops, I forgot to include my two equal signs here. So replace this variable to be blank if the value of that variable is an n. So 21 changes were made, which is what we would expect. Now we should be able to destring. And so that time it worked in that it actually converted everything to numeric. And you'll see that there's 21 missing values, which is what we knew we would have from up here. And if we bring our data back up, we'll see that this is now black. And so with that, now we can run summary statistics or descriptive statistics and get whatever information we need in that format. So that is how you destring a variable, which is something that is often encountered in the process of data cleaning and preparing data for analysis.